You have a
So
nice.
that's, the father
So
sits
big
here,
there,
the mother sits there, and sits there. And the children are right here,
All right,
and
yeah.
we have to behave.
We do.
I'm not the mother, I'm just the paid babysitter.
Okay,
You're the nanny.
The mom and
I'm
the
the nanny.
Chris.
Yes, there you go.
You're not-
All right.
There wasn't a soft copy, right?
No,
There was a soft copy in the email.
there was in the email, but this is slightly modified with the Boylston items taken out of
Okay,
it.
other than just the Boylston numbers taken out, would it make sense though to put
If
that up
this
so
whole copy is
the audience
needed
can
here, I
actually
can
see it?
offer some to the.
Oh, absolutely.
Another one.
It's the same.
I have a copy.
Oh, okay.
It's a little
I have a copy of already, I'm sorry, I've already written on it, so.
Oh, my goodness.
But you have
No, it
it,
is
Should I
not.
Marilyn, I
write?
think that copy is a little different. Is that what you had said?
It's a little different in the sense that I won't be covering the Boylston slides today because that's
I
really
recommend-
relevant to you.
Yeah, I recommended they bring
Is that the
copies
only
in case someone
difference?
didn't have a
Is the
computer with them.
addition, removal of the Boylston slides? Because the reason I ask is because we are live and people that
Oh, sure.
watching it will not be able to know anything that's going on. If we could use the soft copy you sent and just skip those slides that are
Yeah,
relevant.
there's one tiny asterisk here that I think I've added based on some of the questions from Kristen, but I'm gonna speak to that anyhow, so.
Yeah,
I mean, they can
okay.
largely follow on what they have if they've pulled something offline.
Yeah, if you
it's
can
fine.
probably just put that up.
Do you mind plugging me in, Jamie?
Whatever works. Yep, one for Al, one for me. And he decides to finish up with his snow call.
What is it looking like for tomorrow? Icy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
looking,
the
it's looking
problem.
morning.
Flores.
I'm not gonna speak to what Al's
No, no,
decision will be.
no, I
I
didn't.
had some, yeah.
Just meant more generally, I haven't checked the weather
Yeah,
today,
I think
so.
Worcester's doing it 2 hours. I think that'll be the common.
Yeah.
It's good that you guys have that collective decision making. I usually,
It's so hard
Figure it out at
because
the last
if
minute.
we make a decision and all the surrounding towns make a different decision, all of our teachers who live in surrounding towns are on those schedules, right? So then they're gonna call out sick, so it's really much easier to try to be consistent among the districts if you can. I mean, sometimes you get some wild cards and some decisions otherwise, but
I'm sure that's a challenge.
Yeah.
There we go. Should go in a minute. Maybe now you have to turn it on too? Yes, now it went blue. Excellent. See if this will.
Once we have that running, I calls to order and we can do the minutes real quick.
Okay.
Okey-dokey.
If we're all set then.
I think we are all set and we're live on YouTube and Zoom, so we're good to go.
Okay, call to order for the Berlin Finance Committee. Open session public meetings are subject to being recorded. Your image and voice will be recorded. All right, first item of business, we'll just get our minutes out of the way. So minutes from last week. Do we have a motion for that?
I move that we approve them. There was a couple typos, but I think they're taken care of.
Yes, we sent them to the committee with
That's
the
right, okay.
corrections.
I second it.
Okay, any other discussion on it? All right, roll call, Scott, aye.
Mary, I.
Heidi, I.
Cliff, I.
All right, passes 4-0. Okay, and you're ready with the visual?
Ready with the visual.
Okay, we're here for the Berlin Boylston Regional School District. Thank you.
Alrighty, so just gear up. So you have a presentation. This is version 2.0 of the budget. My process is to go through pretty meticulously over and over. We review and re-review the budget. There are 1.1, 1.2 versions all along the way, and once we have another meeting like this, we typically create sort of the next full numbered version, a lot like if you see software come out, right? Microsoft and things like that. So it's just a little easier. It keeps track of things. So where we are at the moment is right now our baseline, and I think this was a question that came up, is the school committee with a lot of what happened last year. in Desi's mind, never actually sort of approved a final budget in all of the assessments that went out. You know, when Al and I and even Dan Didi got there was a budget in place. We worked with that budget, and the school committee decided to adopt that budget. Desi pretty much informed us, you guys need to vote a budget. So that is the budget we're working from here. I know that budget may differ from people's perspectives of what the budget may have been voted previously, what have you. Unfortunately, that's something that I really can't control. This is the budget that the school committee voted on December 10th, 2024, for lack of an actual budget in Desi's mind. So, you know, I think if you're looking at that relative to assessments and things like that, you know, the other reality is that the budget doesn't always track exactly with assessments. Depends on sometimes how much E&D, how much school choice, how much circuit breaker, other things go into the equation. So I think as a town, I'd focus your attention more on sort of the impact of the assessments and what those look like.
So Aaron,
Yeah.
I just want to zone in on what was,
Sure.
that was a December vote, right, by the school committee?
Yes,
saying
that
this-
ended up being
So
voted in
what's
December.
the document in front of the school committee when they voted? Was it the assessment letter to the town after the June 17 meeting? What was
So that December was a total budget amount. So a total budget amount had not been voted
Okay.
by. So if you go back to the June 17th meeting and look at the minutes, there is no actual total budget voted. They vote and agree to a number of changes to assessments, but the assessment in, for example, Desi's mind isn't the budget. So
Sure.
when we met with Desi in November,
Yeah.
they were pretty clear that in their minds, we did not have a budget.
Okay. Was that because there were no school committee minutes from June 17, or was it something
Uh,
else?
My understanding is there's minutes. I've seen them online. I don't know. I can't speak to what Desi's feeling was. There wasn't a total budget approved. And I've gone through those minutes on June 17th. You know, I think what the commitment was, regardless of the budget they voted, the commitment was to keep this year's assessments where they were. There was a conversation about, you know, do we go back and try to push for a higher assessment amount? And that was decided against. You know, there are some resources that the district could bring to bear to meet this budget. Our hopes is that we'll be within or below this budget by the end of the year, or, you know, within a reasonable shooting. I know we've had some things come up, costs come up that may impact that a little bit, but again, I think I'd focus on the assessments. I think, you know, I think some of the things that you're going to see in the assessments, I know there were some challenges in terms of sort of what went into the budget last year, and some questions about transparency and things like that. I do know, you know, going back over the budget last year, there were some pretty significant increases. If I think about sort of my own budget history from last year, health insurance was a significant increase, as it is this year. And I'll speak to that in a few minutes. Out of district costs went up significantly last year. And the district was probably also bearing the brunt of a very significant increase to private out of district placements. I don't know if that was shared with you, but the OSD approved a 17% increase to out of district private placements in the 23 school year, that in many cases you weren't really able to budget for, and you ended up having to budget for it in 24. Or I'm sorry, for 24, that budget.
Increase. Yeah, we're familiar with that. increase.
Yeah, that was
Special
a
education.
pretty painful increase. So,
Yeah.
you know, I can't speak to every line in that budget. I can't speak to, but I can certainly say that, you know, it's very tough for a school district to operate in, say, a Prop 2.5 environment with inputs like that. Many of those things are unfortunately mandated. So if a student goes into an out of district placement, we don't have a choice. So an IEP is a legally binding document. It's not based on our wishes. It's usually based on a team meeting and the needs of the student. So those are just some caveats I want to throw in place. So, you know, regardless of where the budget was and things like that, and the assessment, some of those increases. I really can't speak to all of the budget process last year, but I can speak to knowing that, you know, if towns are looking for 2.5, I mean, there's really limited opportunity to get there aside from a lot of luck and cuts at this
Sure.
point. I mean, where you know, most school districts right now are operating at about a 5% environment. It's hard to, you know, again, I will speak to specific items and inputs here. We can speak to more details down the road and efforts we're going to make to bring the budget down. But I just want to be upfront about what we're using for the budget. I think it was a very fair question to ask. And because of the timing, it may not have been as clear when we were presenting that. So that wasn't my intent. We had to have a baseline, and that was the baseline.
If I could just ask one clarifying question.
Mhm.
So with the budget number that was voted on
Mhm.
December 10th, the total budget is $24,793,688. So that's your starting point for FY 26.
Yes,
So when you show the 4.22% overall budget increase from 25 to 26, it's based on that December 10th number.
Yeah, yeah.
So the only concern that I have
Mhm.
is when the original budget was voted and the assessment that
Mhm.
we actually are paying on, it comes out to a fairly significant lower
Mhm.
amount. So it's skewing a little bit in terms of where we're starting for 26 because we paid less in 25. So it's actually a larger jump for
Mhm.
Berlin than it appears to be. And I just, you know, because you guys have the percentages you came up with, we came up with a percentage, they're different. And I wanted to be able to explain to the
Fair enough.
public why those numbers are
Mhm.
different, because
Fair
I'm
enough.
sure we will all get that
Mhm.
question.
Sure. And this is, you know, again, I want to be clear that we are already working on version 3.0.
Nice.
So we are continuing to endeavor to bring this budget down. I will speak to some, I guess, harsh realities in a few moments as we walk through. But if you let me keep going, if that kind of answers the question and gets us started, does that work?
Well,
Or-
yeah, so we have that vote and
Yep.
what the December 10 minutes don't tell us is
Mhm.
what piece of that total
Mhm.
voted budget is assessed to the town of Berlin.
Yep.
And then when I look at the June 17 minutes of the school committee, it doesn't
Yes.
tell
So-
us
so
that either.
that-
So
that-
we don't have it written down,
In-
so that's a hard thing to Kristen's point,
So
where do we start?
I
with-
believe the memo I provided in December indicated that the assessments would remain the same. So we haven't increased the assessment. So the assessments are within that vote.
So I think the assessment
Yeah.
is in this June 17 minutes.
The assessment
I
is
think the final-
8,442,194.67.
Mhm.
But we're starting with FY 26 at what the assessment would have been if we
Mhm.
had been assessed at that level. So that's my concern because there's a larger jump there. So, which obviously I want to give you an
I
opportunity to
understand that.
explain.
That's fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a fair point.
I think I got
Um,
this enough.
yeah.
I'll let it be.
But you did receive the memo from Aaron in December that gave that assessment and all those values as well, too. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving into the next slide, gives us a little sense of where some of the impacts are. Berlin Memorial, continues to be a little higher. We've managed to bring that down considerably. If you look at the total budget for the year, again, these budgets are based on that sort of higher budget than was in say June, but the assessments again at the end remain the same, but this gives you at least a sense of where the costs are running. Right now, Berlin Memorial is running 4.38%. I want to be clear that Boylston Elementary, that is actually a negative number. I don't know why that That should be negative 1.68%. My apologies.
That's okay. It's actually showing
What's
negative
that?
on here.
Oh, it is
That-
there. I don't have it here. I don't know what happened
It's
there.
all
I
right.
apologize. Berlin Memorial, a lot of the key drivers stay the same. We have moved two of the agency paras to Tohoto, paraprofessionals. Some of the needs shifted and since the version 1.0, we've shifted some of those needs to Tohoto. There have been some savings at Tohoto as well as some, in all cases, some appreciation of the governor's budget coming out and some of those numbers going up a little bit. I will say health insurance. This is the sort of harsh reality that I'm providing. I just spoke with our rep this morning with MIA. Their number as about 18.5% for our district in terms of an increase. I can absorb the 0.5%. I looked at the numbers. Retiree health based on, so what I do is I pull all of the actual counts of who's using which insurance programs, or not who, but the numbers of people that are using each of the programs and come up with an estimate. I think we've got, we've got just about the same room. The differential in retiree health as we do is have in employee health. So those two will wash out, but both of them, the average increase for both of those combined is a solid 18%. We talked a little bit about homeless transportation. This came up as a question at some others. We have a definite need for it this year. And we're sort of predicting we may have some need for it next year. It's a very unpredictable metric. It's hard to determine. That number is typically based at 18,000, is really about half of a full year. Either oftentimes you end up cost sharing with someone with homeless transportation, or ideally it's on a temporary basis. Our hope is, our need currently this year may drop. We may see additional need, or that need may remain. We're kind of rolling the dice and saying, we'll put in a half year and see where that goes.
So let me, on that particular point, let me ask about what it looks like on the revenue side for
Mhm.
fiscal 26. Because this is suitable for 100% state reimbursement for homeless transit.
Homeless transportation is not 100%, I don't think. Double check
There's
that.
an act.
There's an act maybe, but I don't think
You're
it's
saying the
law.
state doesn't follow its own law?
Well, is
Supposed to be 100%,
Okay.
18 for special.
I'll
ed
take a look.
transit. I was just looking at it today.
okay, I'll double check that.
Because we hadn't seen that before, so I think,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
even irrespective of that,
Yeah.
would you offset it with revenue in the?
We could, we would, I need to see where that comes out. It probably comes out in our regional transportation that's baked into our number. So we have a regional transportation number. I can see if maybe there's some room to assess that over.
And can you share that act with us? Because in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
career, and
Yeah.
even working in Worcester Public Schools for all those years with homelessness, I've never been familiar with that.
Are you talking about McKinney-Vento?
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah. There is a reimbursement, but I believe there's a baseline that you have to meet before the reimbursement kicks in.
Yeah.
it's not just.
Yeah.
So you gotta have a lot of it.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's not
Yeah.
really on it.
Unfortunately, that's my understanding of McKinney-Vento. Now, I haven't done homelessness in a few years, but when I used to work for the city of Worcester, that was one thing I did when I was there too, so.
Yeah. You will select with that, it has to reach a threshold before you.
Threshold, thank you, that was the word I was looking for.
So the DESI website was a little misleading on that because they have the percentages for different kinds of transit that would be reimbursed.
They
And you
don't
just
talk
gotta
about the
read that,
threshold.
there's a threshold that
Yeah.
to use
Yeah,
that, where
okay.
they have to,
Mhm.
but I'll look into it
We'll
again.
double check.
Well, we may
We'll
not,
double check.
if we don't meet the threshold, we don't need it.
Yeah.
You're on it. You know that there's a
Yes.
potential.
And I was curious what act you were referring to. It's good. McKinney-Vento, absolutely.
Yeah, it is McKinney-Vento, but.
It's
yes.
weird how
My brain-
old things come
Yeah.
back to you sometimes.
Yeah. A lot of that is also subject to appropriations, which is always a fun instrument to play with.
Sure.
Special education transportation remains the same. We're looking at a solid increase there. Electricity, I go through every single line item to the best of my ability. I look at prior years. This is just an adjustment based on past years. I think I shared that last time. I managed to bring Tohonto's electricity down a little bit based on past years, so you'll see some benefit in that assessment for their tuition and fees. This is, you know, some standard increases of staff, of students moving around. I think last year there was a private placement. This year it might be multiple collaborative placements for that.
So that's out of district?
These are these are
district.
largely out of district costs. Yeah, students
Okay.
who, based on their IEP, need services that we can't provide in district.
Just a quick question on the electricity. Berlin has an aggregation program. Is the school part of that?
A really good
Or
question.
can it be? That,
Yeah,
maybe that's it can't be, huh?
No, because the school's not in Berlin.
Berlin.
This is the big-
Yeah.
Yes,
Berlin
yeah.
Memorial?
I thought you were referring to.
I don't believe we're part of it, but if there's some ability to become part of it, is that a,
It's an electricity aggregation program that we put together for the town. So it's
Mhm.
basically like a large purchasing power where you
Mhm.
go out to bid for the whole town for
Okay.
just the supply.
Mhm.
Your bill still comes from National Grid, but the supply comes from whoever the low bidder is. And I know it's residential with some commercial, but there is a limit, I think, on size. I don't
Mhm.
think this building is eligible, so that's probably why the school wouldn't be either,
Yeah,
but
we looked at that when we first implemented it.
did you? Okay.
Yeah,
It was, the question came up at the energy committee the other day too, like which buildings are
Yeah,
eligible,
but it may have
which aren't.
changed too.
So
'cause it's been-
I'd be happy to look into it and just see.
yeah, if there's something there.
It's electricity aggregation.
Yeah.
And it's
Okay.
through, well, there's all different groups. Ours is through Colonial
Mhm.
Power. They manage it for us. And every 3 years, they basically
Mhm.
put our supply out to bid.
Mhm.
And then everyone is automatically opted in town. It's lower than the National Grid rate unless you opt out.
Okay.
So I'd be happy to check it out.
Great, thank you.
So going into the actual assessment, you'll recall version 1.0 is what you saw before, that's on the left.
Yeah.
So we've, at this point, I won't go into every single item, we've gone through them before. But those are sort of governor's numbers for chapter 70, chapter 71. So to this point, we brought the total assessment down by almost 300,000 from last time. As I finish up, we'll talk about a couple or in fact, actually it might be a good time. One of the commitments that Al and I have talked about, knowing that some of the challenges are in place and we know that we can do better, is we're gonna look to budget for a reduced number of those agency paras. So, you know, right now, those cost more than twice the cost of a traditional paraprofessional. You know, the challenge is most of those positions are IEP mandated. So, you know, we have one-to-ones that are mandated by a student's IEP. We're looking at a number of different options programmatically to see whether we can try to look at some programming that will help us reduce the total number of paraprofessionals we need. But we're also going to make a full court press to directly hire paraprofessionals rather than use agencies. So, you know, on average, we can say that would save us about $30,000 per paraprofessional. So Al and I are going to sit down and we're going to set a goal for ourselves. I'm not going to say that I think we have 9 budgeted agency paraprofessionals. I'm not sure we can get that number to 0, but I think Al and I would like to set a goal to get at least halfway there and maybe, you know, limit the number to 4 and figure that out. So that would be in version 3.0 when you see that, and we'd be aggregating some other items.
We started the postings already. We even, one of our nursing staff, right, it was an agency we posted and already getting some good demand on it as well too. So starting in February, posting for jobs for next year, it is a win for us. So that's, we're trying to just beat everybody else out there.
Right.
Having a para contract as well too in place, that makes it more desirable as well too. So all those things will hopefully get that number, like Aaron said,
Yeah.
that's our goal, to get that down there, because that's a big expense.
Very interesting. We end up competing against the agencies as well to hire these positions. So we actually did get an agency referral on a position recently, and we got that same person coming in as a regular applicant. So we ended up continuing them as a regular applicant and letting the
Get a cost
agency know,
savings.
you know, we're not going to go that route. And there's a certain point, once we've gone far enough down the path, we can't direct hire that person, obviously, because that would be, you know, a bit of a violation of sort of ethical treatment, but we were ahead of that. So we're gonna look to hire that person as a direct hire rather than an agency. So
It's amazing. We put out the job for a director, interim director of technology. And the amount of agencies that reach out to us before, the minute we post it, right there, agencies are out there, they're just saying, we can help you with that, we can help you with that. So you don't get that individual person, but the agencies are reaching out and trying to jump on that as well too. So we're competing against them. And the other piece, which we wouldn't even talk about this year, we don't really have an HR department, right? So making those calls, right? So when those people apply for school spring and put their, you gotta be right on them because someone else is calling them and saying, come meet with us first as well too. So it's a piece that we're missing, certainly in the district office.
we'll be looking also at where we post.
Yes.
Right now we post predominantly on School Spring. School Spring used to at least get pulled over by Indeed. My understanding is Indeed isn't pulling those positions over anymore, so we may need to look at whether we go to Indeed, or I don't know if it's even still valid anymore, but monster.com or places like that, whether we do the local paper. You know, there's also social media pushes. I know a lot of people who advertise positions just directly on Facebook, right? Because that's where people are. You know, so we can look at some of that.
We're doing that on our district website as
Yeah.
well too. If you appreciate, if you have an opportunity to look at the new Tohoto website, we're revamping all of our, so you'll see definitely a change in them, which will be
Yeah.
much more active.
If we set a goal, we'll be under the gun for it,
Yep.
because if we don't make that goal, we're gonna have to find money somewhere, so. Kind of, you know, I call it skin in the game, right? We like to have some skin in the game and incents us to do some things. So again, we getting to Tohoto. Tohoto still has a pretty significant increase in salaries. That was the case previously. Employee health, retiree health, same thing. You'll recall from last time, the substitutes issue, they were very short on substitutes last year. I'd like to, you know, the intent is to bring that number up so it's more appropriate. I think we talked somewhat about the increased use of sick time and things like that have happened recently. Special education transportation and private special education tuitions and collaborative tuitions. Those are largely the result of some move ups that came from other schools. Some of them, some are move-ins. There's a move-in in there, but there's a new placement and 2 move-ups from, I think one was Boylston, one was Berlin. I'm not 100% certain offhand. So when we get into Honto, we go right back into the assessment process. Their assessment process is a little more detailed because it takes very much into account the minimum local contributions. The minimum local contribution is a factor in the school assessments, but it just gets rolled into the whole number anyhow. But this is where minimum local contributions break out a little more importantly. So when you get down to the second page, these are all the same items we talked about before. We reduced by chapter 70, chapter 71, some charter reimbursement. And then when we get into the next slide, this is where we get into some of the fun colors. We get into Berlin and Boylston's minimum local contributions. Berlin's is in green. I tried to color code it a little bit in the handout that folks have. It's blue, and I understand that's a little harder to read. That's why I had switched it to green for the version you're seeing up there. So when we get to above minimum contributions, above minimum shares, we get to the next slide, which gives us the total operating assessments for Berlin for next year. Combining both. So, you know, last time we were here, we were at $9.5 million. We're down to 8.9, down about 600,000. I'm not sure how much more room we have to go down. But we will continue to do everything we can, and we would definitely look for guidance from the towns as well at this point. So, you know, after tonight, we'll have presented in December and now tonight, so it'd be, you know, probably helpful to understand you know, where the town stands and where we can be. We would like this to be a collaborative effort rather than, you know, a standoff between two parties. Getting into debt assessments, one of the things to recognize, we've spoken about this, I think in a prior session, but the prior capital debt assessments were not calculated correctly. So there was an interest payment that wasn't picked up in the prior 2 years of debt assessments. I have recognized that here, so you'll see debt assessments going up by that amount. I believe it was about around $250,000 difference between the two towns. So each town picking up their share of that would be the differential. So going into total capital assessments, we have the debt assessment, then we have elementary capital and shares of Tohoto Capital. I won't go into all of the capital items. We've met with your capital committee. We've prioritized some of these for them. We understand that $1.4 million in capital for Berlin Elementary School would be an enormous, if not ridiculous, lift. So, you know, what we'd like to do is to continue with the prioritization. I can tell you, we shared that the replacement of the elevator controls is our #1 priority. That is both a health and safety issue, an ADA compliance issue, and powers that be in the elevator world issue. We can be cited and fined for not having an operating elevator. So again, all of these are good points of conversation. I think one of the things that you will see is that as we don't address some things in capital, they will continue. Some of the mini splits, for example, for AC in some of the classrooms, is something that's a carryover from last year. I think it's important that we just also address sort of unfunded capital needs, as I think the town should probably do as well, at least keep track of those unfunded capital needs. And we understand the sort of shortfalls we're in from a capital perspective. And when it comes time to maybe do a big venture in the world of capital, we all come together and work on that. So that's really it. You know, you've got assessments, operating assessments, capital assessments. I don't think any of us are of the mind that this is sort of the final point and where Berlin sees itself. So, you know, we'd like to, you know, continue the conversation. We are preparing to have a budget hearing. I think we pushed it out a little bit so that we could.
You get a chance to talk about that?
I have not talked about that. So, you know, I think we've talked to Kristen a little bit, and we'd like to try to do that on March 11th. It puts us within the threshold. It also lets us take a few more passes. I think we had aggressively, or the school committee had aggressively had February 25th on the docket for that. We have some folks who are going to be part of that, who are taking some well-deserved vacation time over February break and things like that. And it would be helpful for I think all involved to be able to kind of just push it out a little bit and have a better final product.
And that really is just a scheduling issue. So please know that we have February 25th. School committee still has as a date. We're asking respectfully, we could push that out to that March 11th, which is their first school committee meeting in March. If that doesn't work, again, we are prepared and ready for February 25th. But again, it's all just personal, trying to work around everybody's vacations and stuff like that, and making sure that they'll all be present to answer any questions you may need on that date in front of the school committee as well too.
And just to clarify, that would be the final vote by the district on the budget?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Right now, it's scheduled for February 25th. And again, it's still in the books for that date. We wanted to make sure that was something that would work well for you guys in your timeline. So after we talk about it publicly tonight, I'll go back to school committee and let them know that they will could change to that first meeting in March.
With that said, I've seen plenty of cases where school committees and FinComs get together and reach agreements after that vote. So I don't think it means that that has to be an endpoint. I'd rather not get to the point where we're trying to take desperate votes on the floor of town meeting. But you know, things like joint meetings, you know, my general understanding in speaking with Desi, I've talked to them more in the past 6 months than I have in 15 prior years in this job. And you know, their mindset is, you know, as long as assessments stay the same or drop, there's no harm to the process, right? Because you know, if we took $100,000 out of the voted assessment, the town wouldn't object to that, right? Within, say, the 45-day limit, and things like that. So I think we're mindful of that, and we're open to continuing conversation. We understand that things change all along the way. We may have a massive windfall in that time. I don't know. We might, and we might be willing to have a conversation about that.
So if I could get your thoughts on that change of date, how people are feeling about that?
I like the idea of having more time to
Mhm.
study and deliberate on numbers, just because there's been a lot of confusion for an entire 2-year period. So I think it's useful to have the extra time.
Great.
I'm just looking at our calendar. So March 21 is our deadline
Yep.
Mhm.
for the 45 days ahead of
Yep.
town meeting on May 5th.
Sure.
So March 11, that still gives you time to post a couple of meetings if you had to.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
So I think I'm speaking for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, cool about more time is definitely
Mhm.
useful.
Sounds good. Okay, well, our goal this year, working with school committee and both communities, is to make this process as seamless as possible, right? We're really trying to make this process. We've heard the history, we heard last year, and our goal is, that's a goal on Aaron and I's part, is to make, and school committee as well, is to make this be as seamless as possible and make it all about our kids and getting the money we need to do, so we can do the things that we have to do for our kids as well.
One, I'm just, I told Chris and I to try to address this. There was a question that came up about per student costs, for Berlin and Boylston being somewhat different. Unfortunately, that's a result of the regional agreement. So your formula in the regional agreement pretty much says that each town is going to pick up the cost of their own elementary school. So to Honto, your per student cost should be very similar. However, once you get to Berlin Elementary versus Boylston Elementary, you know, one example I can think of, so there's a number of items where we have costs that are mandated or required in some way, shape, or form. And regardless of how many students we have in a school, we have to have that position or that item in place. So one example is a school principal, right? Every school needs a school principal of record. Both Berlin and Boylston have a school principal. Boylston has about 350 kids. Berlin has about 250, very roughly. So you divide that principal cost by 350, you get a much smaller per student cost for that principal than at 250. Every school needs a school nurse. We can't be open without a school nurse. That same applies. So if you think about some of those positions, right? You know, every school typically has an admin assistant, right? You need someone to, you know, keep attendance and take care of all the real things that happen so the principal can, I don't know, you know, do what they do. You know, you need someone to do the real work around the school. I'm joking, of course.
Yes,
Principals
yes,
are
yes.
very busy. But we all talk about how the admin assistants run the schools, but those are things that absolutely need to be in place. And when you have smaller schools, I've dealt in communities with schools that have 100 students, and you end up with per student costs that end up very high as a result, because you have all of those sort of fixed costs that are sunk in no matter what. You can also speak to, you know, some of the per square foot costs. The smaller a building, the more your per square foot costs end up costing you, right? That's why many places would rather have very big buildings that are very highly utilized. So there's a lot of intrinsic things built into the budget. And if we were, believe me, if we were using a more conventional formula in our regional agreement, I couldn't be happier because it would save me probably a week of work computing all of those figures and wrangling it out. Desi would be happier. They've lodged their concerns with it. But this is what the towns have chosen, and I'm not arguing against it if this is what the towns want to do, but there are some realities to how that shakes out.
Okay, that was the question, actually, quick on this one, and
Mhm.
part of the, what was Scott Hawkins' question was, another piece you want to get into there was probably because of the past lack of transparency, is, once that, one number goes over to the district, and I think there's lots of, lost confidence, because of the past history of the,
Yeah.
transparency is,
Yep.
how do we know the money that's went to BMS
Yep.
stays with BMS?
Mhm.
Because what was basically described to us before is that they could move this money to different needs, and one town is subsidizing another town.
Yep.
So that's really, I think, the main crux of the problem. But we went through the whole thing, like, the principal, and we didn't use the school nurse on that. And of course, that there is a higher, we have more, veteran teachers at BMS, so there is a higher salaries, and there's also a past history before the district joined, of course, we didn't have OPEB, for the Berlin's
Mhm.
teachers, they on average had higher salaries because of that.
Okay.
Boylston did, so there's lots of that stuff, but I think the big concern is
Mhm.
when we pass that money over, and because of the lack of transparency in the past, if somebody's filling a hole, I mean, there's a lot of concerns, like,
Yeah.
well, there's a hole of 100,000 at Boylston Elementary, that's not Berlin taxpayers
Mhm.
are picking up, and that's
Yep.
transferred over. It's like, how do you ensure that that's
Yep.
not happening?
So both schools have, I guess the first thing I would say is you can go to our website today, very front and center of the front page is the report that I shared with school committee at the school committee meeting last night. It shows the expenditures by both schools as well as the central office in Tohoto. So you can see those lay out and flow through to the departments. There's a few caveats I gave. We're still cleaning up some things and working through some things. But if you look, you will see a lot of those expenses are flowing pretty proportionally to where things are. Changes happen. I mean, I have to, there is some reality that, students move. We sometimes have students in and out. We may have a student with high needs come in. We may need to hire a new paraprofessional for Berlin. We may have to do the same for Boylston. So you may see some costs shift, but I think in the overall and in the aggregate, you will see those flow out in fairly solid accordance with the budget. Our goal isn't to try to, mass costs. I don't have any skin in the game for Berlin or Boylston. And my hope is that we don't have a situation where, someone believes that to be the case.
We
that-
also,
that we're
we
doing
know
that.
that
It's
people
not.
are feeling that way, right? And so the
Mhm.
school committee is aware of that as well too. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that our chairman, Mike Topman, has asked us to do is put it right on the district website, right in the very front page is all the budget stuff. So it's not hidden somewhere, right? They have to go doing multiple clicks. It's right there in the front. And we will continue to keep that updated as every time we make any changes. So it's front and center for people to see. We're
Well,
trying to break that feelings and thoughts that people have had in the
Yeah.
past and move forward with that. So everybody's on board with that.
is that, Al, that's a radical change from what we've been experiencing,
Yep.
that, and it's
Okay.
the same players in the school
But
committee.
we've all.
Radical change.
but
Thank
we've
you
all-
guys very much.
But no, it's
Okay.
a team effort here, and
All
we
right.
all agree that we put in the past, and we're moving
Right.
forward, right? And so this is the direction we're all going in. So we
Right.
need to give also credit where credit's due. So this is what we're all doing together as a team.
It's
I-
good
I-
because it's
Go
normal.
team go.
Yeah.
It's just normal, and we haven't had normal for 2 years, so this is nice to have normal again,
Good.
back to a dialogue, so. And also, I appreciate very much the work pulling out the amount from version 1 to version 2.
Mhm.
I definitely appreciate moving in a direction that's quite helpful. Now, I want to go back to that 7,000 per student question.
Mhm.
Now, I realize that's last year, but it's kind of important, and it's also important to
Yeah.
Scott's question because none other than the then chair of the school committee
Yeah.
said in my presence at an
Mhm.
open school committee meeting, oh yeah, we can take that money and give it to Boylston. So there is a basis for the
Okay.
paranoia, if you will,
Yeah.
all right? It's out there,
Fair
it's
enough.
been stated,
Fair
it's been
enough.
stated in different ways, more than one time.
Yeah.
So the 7,000, I didn't calculate it because I don't trust.
What,
this
I don't know,
rate.
the 7,000 refers
7,000, I
to,
just, well, I said, okay, we got,
We,
for sake of argument, last year we had 220,000, or excuse me, 220 students
Mhm.
at Berlin Memorial.
right.
7,000 was the higher assessment per student
Mhm,
last year for
Okay.
the Berlin Memorial in
mhm.
comparison to Boylston Elementary.
Yeah, before any negotiations began on this, it was, right, exactly. It was just short of 7,000 per student at BMS versus Boylston Elementary.
Right.
Again, that was at the earlier stages. I mean, we ended up.
That was the town meeting
Right.
vote. That was, those are the numbers going into town meeting.
Well, not,
The May-
So-
essentially, yes, we had a meeting a week beforehand. We came up with an agreement that we would put another 250,000. They were looking at
Mhm.
$250,000 of cuts or that stuff.
Right.
So that obviously would reduce it by
Mhm.
250,000 and then.
June 17, the May meeting, the actual town meeting.
Oh, yes, at the town meeting,
Just to
so
be
you
clear.
are correct, yes.
So when I put in 7,000 per those 220
Mhm.
students at
Yeah.
Berlin Memorial,
Yeah.
that's a total of $1,540,000. Does it really cost that much more to run Berlin Memorial than BES?
I haven't looked, I would have to look
Yeah,
at those
so
numbers.
that's what I'm
So
sure, but
a couple
it's not
caveats
right here.
I'd like to share, and I can't, I'm not giving a definitive answer.
Yeah.
I'm giving some thoughts.
Yeah.
My first thought is a single out of district student in a
Yes.
district, in a school your size can drastically change those figures. Drastically. It can change the per student cost by easily $1,000 per student. So that's a factor. So when you're looking at some of that
Yep.
stuff, that really plays
Understood.
heavily. You're also dealing with relatively, even at Boylston, you're dealing with relatively small sample sizes. So if you're looking at just 1 year,
Yeah.
I would suggest looking at many years and aggregating that data over many years. A single year of students in a school as small as 200 students can show a lot of statistical variance. So you can be looking at 7 to 10% variance for a sample of that size, depending on what you're doing. So I want to be, I'm not saying that's the cause, but I want to be realistic that these things may go up and down a bit. And I'd be happy to maybe pull some things out and try to go through like a longitudinal study of that so we can see where that is. Rather than just sort of snapshotting 1 year. I also struggle with per student cost as a standard. I can share with you, I had a debate with the Commissioner of Education a number of years ago, who was basically sharing a graph that per student cost was a big scatter chart, right? It was just a big cloud when you mapped one against the other. But when you map relative to performance, so if you map per student relative performance, it's just a cloud, it's just a big scatter cloud. If you trace net school spending versus performance by schools, you get an incredibly linear graph. So I think there's really important ways to look at the data and asking yourself, what's in the data. So different students. So poverty is a huge factor.
Sure.
Students experiencing poverty can cost 40% more. I can show you the studies. I think University of California, I want to say it was Pittsburgh, did studies that showed 35 to 45% increase in costs for students experiencing poverty. And a lot of those are factored into net school spending. So you'll see schools that have tremendously high per student costs. Springfield, Worcester have pretty high per student costs, but their percent over net school spending is actually negative because their needs are so high, so very, very high. So I'd be careful about using that as a strict metric.
I'm okay with that. I've
Okay.
also seen that, I've also been told by somebody that studied this, somebody used to be on this finance committee years ago.
Yeah.
That the only real correlation was the socioeconomic status of the parents, that correlates to performance.
100%.
And that in fact, school spending didn't didn't directly, you didn't get the linear, you got it from socioeconomic status.
Yes.
Parents. But in Massachusetts, we do a lot to try to bring up those who have less.
Correct.
So it may actually come to align with net school spending because of our policies, our
Possibly.
public policies.
I respectfully disagree with some of that statement, right? So
Okay.
we just, so I look at,
The conversations on.
I agree, and then not at the time, but it's not all just to do with socioeconomic status, it's also about the net school spending as well too. And when you're looking at inner city schools, right, and the kids that are performing well and that are going to Ivy League schools, right? I was a principal at many of those schools, right? So just be mindful of that, right? So it's not all of that, it's a combination of the both.
Yes,
Combination of both.
these are all broad generalities.
Yes, absolutely. I used to say broad generalities without making sure, there's a counterpoint, because when you say something becomes public, and I want to make sure.
Yeah, yeah.
we have a counterpoint, so,
But-
yeah.
We might
To your
want to
point,
move
that-
to
yeah.
just looking at some of the budget numbers.
I
where
was
we are.
gonna.
So let's get
So I'd
back
like
to
to,
that.
yeah,
I'd like to hear from your side, that's.
Money is, and
Let's
let's
get
just
to
talk
that.
about the dollar amounts.
I thought you might find that interesting. So this is showing really huge, and I apologize. It's like enormous budget spreadsheet that's going to come up here. But at least no one will have any
There you
trouble
go.
seeing it.
Don't need
Um,
glasses, that's beautiful.
That's right, and I'm gonna share this so the folks who are online with us this evening can see it as well. Give me just a moment to share.
It's in the Google Drive.
I'm doing like triple duty here. Yes, it is. This is the one that's FY 26 budget draft dated today.
Today. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so let me see if I can get rid of this. So
I'm
that
getting
you
yelled
can
at in the
actually
crowd, do you
see
hear
it.
that?
Who's yelling?
Trying to make the 2 hour delay call at the same time.
So you're doing duty over here yourself.
I'm so sorry to leave them early, I usually do. That's why I was a few minutes late, I'm sorry about that.
Understandable. All right, so this is a really simple summary, and I have to say this has a number of estimates in it at this point. So this, like everything else.
Just like us.
We have estimates. So basically, if we do our typical 2.5% on local property taxes over FY 25, plus our estimated new growth, which unfortunately is quite low. 200,000 is all the assessor is comfortable with me moving forward with new growth. It has really stagnated. A few years back, we were in the $500,000 range, and now we're at 2. So if you add those two together, basically the new funding that we have for FY 26 for everyone is $588,508. I'm trying to.
That's good.
I'm trying to get myself out of I'm trying to get myself out of the TV because that doesn't help. I'm happy to share this with you too. This is also on our website. We have the expenditures up right now. I don't have this up because there's a lot of assumptions in the revenue. But I can certainly get this with a lot of preliminary draft information up there. I have also updated state aid to the most recent governor's proposal, which unfortunately is down $2,000. Not that that is a ton of money, but we don't generally like to see things go down. We usually like to see things go up. Thank you, June.
Thank you.
It's like Oz back here. Local receipts. This is the only place, the reason it's in yellow, this is the only place where we might be able to pick up a little bit of money. I am talking though less than $100,000 in revenue. Right now, we are finishing up our FY 24 closeout. So at this time, I can only estimate local receipts based on the previous fiscal year. So I have level funded local receipts. There is a possibility we could pick up a few tens of thousands of dollars, but we're not talking big money here. Our receipts reserved for appropriation are our ambulance receipts that come in, as well as our cemetery receipts, other revenue sources, and then our obligations. So those would be, and actually I'll just skip over to this next screen and let me make this a little bigger so you can see it. That one's small still. Zoom. And I apologize for my notes all over this. Just ignore all my notes. So we can see, so our other revenue sources would be what we put into the budget to offset capital for BMS and Tohoto. So last year we funded $297,385 in capital. I just made the initial assumption without having a final budget number that that's what we're offsetting this year. Obviously, that is subject to change depending on final budget numbers. We also have some mitigation funding for public safety from a number of our larger developments that we use to help offset the salaries of 3 police officers. We actually tried to reduce that to 2 last year because I like to reduce our dependence on outside funding sources, some of which are time limited. But when we came to June town meeting and we did our meet in the middle, we ended up putting funding back, using that funding back in the budget to help offset the free cash that we added for the BBRSD budget, which is a little weird to explain.
Yeah, and we basically,
We-
because we were limited to what we could do at the town meeting, so we used free cash with the expectation, which we corrected at special town meeting, that we were going to be increasing the public safety specialization, but we wanted to make sure it didn't hit the tax rate at that time. So that's why we used the free cash, which we knew we really wanted to use those funds. And that was the reason we kind of offset these things.
Right, and then DOR had a different way they wanted us to report it, and whatever the Department of Revenue tells us to do, much like what DESI tells you to do, we do. So that is what our quote unquote other revenue sources are. And then our offsets are state charges, library, and then assessors overlay, which for those of you who are not familiar with that, that is basically the funding we have to set aside for abatements for property taxes and any ATB cases, which would be if we end up in the appellate tax board hearings for, that's typically for larger developments. And I can tell you the mall will likely be going after a Solomon Pond will likely be going after a significant devaluation and ATB again. We just reduced them $30 million in an ATB case we recently settled. So unfortunately, what's happening is because Berlin has a split tax rate, you're seeing significant commercial devaluation. So where those commercial properties were taking a lot of the burden off of the residential side, it's not as much anymore. So it's really shifting that burden over to the residential side, which is a challenge. Highland Commons doing very well. But
I know you don't know the future about the.
I have a crystal ball,
It
Al.
opens, it doesn't even open till 11 o'clock now. I mean, it closes at 7. I mean, the hours of operation, it's just getting less and less in there.
And I can
See
tell
that.
you, the planning board recently updated me. They are working with the city of Marlboro, Economic Development Department, because Marlboro recently rezoned on Lynch Boulevard to
Okay.
try to attract development. The mall is in receivership right now. It's owned by several banks. It is going to be going up for sale.
Yeah.
And so the mall is 55% in Berlin and 45% in Marlboro. Our zoning does not currently match. We are working to try to align ourselves to make us more attractive for development.
Sure.
So that is a piece that hopefully we'll be able to align ourselves with and, move forward. And then the last piece of this whole thing are our debt exclusions, our Tohoto debt assessment that you spoke of, Aaron, as well as our other debt is for the highway barn garage building that we have over on West Street. So basically, those are what go into the revenue side of the equation, which shows us at 17,713,907. Again, using a number of estimates at this point. This also assumes at this time not using any excess levy capacity. So I do just want to make that clear, and I'll go into a little bit about what excess levy we have. If you look on the expenditure side, what I've entered so far are all of the requests at the levels that we've received to date. And you can see where we're at here. In FY25, we had just over $17 million in requested funds. And in FY26 so far, we have $20,476,300 in requested funds. So it is a significant increase. These are our budget calculations, levy limit, really fun stuff. If you're having trouble sleeping, I highly recommend going to the DOR website and reading about levy limits. But basically what this comes down to is it tells you what your maximum allowed budget is versus what you're proposing. And basically what this shows is if we were to fund everything and use our current excess levy capacity, which is $1,247,552, we still have a deficit of $1.5 million, which means we're going to an override and or debt exclusion.
Mhm.
So let me kind of show you on the expenditure page how that all shakes out.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Does that have the capital numbers?
It does, and it has the updated ones from
Okay,
yesterday.
using their capital
And you see
numbers,
the-
which, okay,
the-
which,
It has the updated Assabet numbers as well,
Mhm.
which I don't know if I had a flurry of emails come in
Mhm.
today. Assabet is a per pupil assessment that we pay, and it has gone up $100,000 over their estimate when they were here in December. So, yes, I was gonna get into that after, but it's always good information to share as we look at what our escalating costs are here. So I think 200 is gonna be too big.
So we're sharpening our pencils on our side.
Yeah,
That out there.
wow. Unfortunately, that's very formula based.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also,
Going on around the
We're
state.
sharpening our
yeah,
pencils.
their minimum contribution from the state has gone up pretty substantially
Yeah.
too, which I know yours has as well. So it's a challenge on all sides. It's just a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So what you see here is basically all of this breakdown here are the expenses on the town side. This is available on the town's budget page, and I'll do a little plug for the town's budget website while I'm at it. If you go to our homepage, there's a little button right in the middle that says FY 26 overview. And I don't know what that noise was, but and you can get a copy of all of these budget requests on that page. Since we are speaking schools, I will come down to what we call our intergovernmental expenses. I did have a conversation with Assabet about one line budgeting because we had the same conversation with Berlin Boylston. And I do believe, and we can have this discussion afterwards or next week when Assabet's here. But for right now, I think it makes sense to have a consistent way that we document and actually do the assessment for the schools in general. So what I've done is I've done a one line number that summarizes the assessment, debt repayment, and capital. And you can see that I've just grayed out and sort of, italicized what the breakdown is, so you can still see that breakdown.
Mhm.
So for Berlin Boylston, since that's what we're specifically speaking
Mhm.
about, our FY 25 assessment was $8,442,195. And the FY 26 request at this time totals $11,409,001. So that is a change of just under 3 million, which works out to 35.1%, which is the number difference that I was referencing
Yeah.
earlier, because I don't
Yeah.
think either one of us are incorrect in the way we're just calculating things differently. And I don't want the public to say, why is everybody on a different page here? I think one thing to point out is, oh, I'm sorry, I went down. This does include the operating assessments for
Mhm.
Berlin Memorial and Tohoto, the requested capital assessments at this time, and actually, I might have that repayment
Mhm.
number wrong. Let me just check now that you gave me these lovely numbers.
I think that might be correct.
Is that correct?
533, your 538 was high, your 533 is dead
Is
on.
correct. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. One question I had on that, does that include making up for that 250?
It doesn't make up for
Doesn't make
anything. I
up
mean,
for
we're,
it. It reflects
yeah, it
that
reflects the
correct
correction.
payment
It
going
reflects the
forward.
correction, yes.
Okay. I
So
did
that's
just,
really the bulk of that sort of 16% is just correcting
right.
that error. If I can offer,
Yeah.
particularly on the capital side, right? We're not presuming that Berlin is going to want to or be able to do $1.4 million in capital. I think we'd like to continue a conversation before we make that's not I just don't want the people out there with an 875% increase.
Yes, and just so you know, and just
Assuming that
FinCom can
that's
back me up, I've been putting that
demand
caveat
from
out
us,
there
yes.
at every FinCom meeting that we
Yep.
know that number was high and you're working on a 10-year capital plan and there are further discussions that need to happen.
Yes.
So,
But the reality is that's not going away, right? Those needs, right? It's like owning your home, right?
Some of those
If you-
items,
The
yeah.
more you let that go on, right? That's why a concern it becomes.
Yeah, in fact, even last week when we were looking at this, because we know, obviously, there's once we have the free cash number and better understand, and we can understand it, and hopefully we can kind of look to be that, stretched out over time, what's reasonable. We're actually using, just zeroing it out just to get the, for the purpose of what the revenue was there and where we are with just the operating numbers.
Which,
Because we know we try and push that with our free cash numbers.
so, right,
Yeah.
if we take the capital out completely, then it's a
Still looking
12.8%
at-
increase.
Yep.
In total, when we
Mhm.
look at the bottom line number, which we will be voting on the bottom line number at town meeting this
We
year,
will,
so.
we will keep sharpening that pencil. I mean, this is not a done deal. Unfortunately, some things I had hoped might come out better, like health insurance, that health insurance number is just harrowing. Relative to things, there's just no way out of it. So, that's part of our cost structure. And it's a big piece. I mean, I want to say $3.5 million of our budget is in health
Mhm.
insurance for employees.
And you are not alone.
Yeah.
So you
no,
can see our
exactly.
number right there, third from the
I
bottom.
was just gonna say,
13.5%. I mean, we're up,
Mhm.
the total was 941,000, 112,000 increase.
and we're lucky to be at 13.5 because Maya for municipalities is running between 9.9 and 19.9.
Yeah.
With the average being just under 15%.
Yeah.
So we did actually get some good news, which I have reflected here. Yesterday from our Maya rep, it looks like we're gonna be more at 12.1. So that does help us a little bit. But again, I understand the 18% because we're hearing the same thing on the municipal side.
The other piece that is still uncertain for us, as you're aware, we're in the middle of negotiations right now with our teachers union, right? So that's a big piece that's still unknown for us.
Mhm.
Just
Is the present contract finishing
end of this year,
end of this year? Okay.
Yeah.
June of 2025, yeah.
And there are a couple unknowns for us. They're not huge unknowns, but just in case anyone wonders where we're all going, June 30th, we're going to an island and starting our own government. Myself, the police chief and the fire chief's contracts are all up on June 30th. So short of creating Utopiaville, which we'd all like to talk about and do, there will be some additional cost reflective in those contracts since they are all currently under negotiation and we don't have those costs. Again, you're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you're talking tens of thousands
Sure.
of dollars, which does impact the overall budget, obviously. So that's a
Understood.
caveat on our side.
Mhm.
So I did a breakdown here at the bottom
Mhm.
of where we are at in terms of the requested increases as they stand now, which again, these are just the requests. This is not necessarily the recommendation or the final numbers. So I do want to put that caveat out there.
Mhm.
Although I will tell you that today I did receive the assessment letter from Assabet. So
Right.
that is a final number. The 163,965 is the increase for Assabet. The town's requested increase again, and we are sharpening our pencils as well, and we'll be
Mhm.
looking at that, is 343,634. And as I just mentioned, the Berlin Boylston District's request is 2,966,806. And I know that includes that high capital number. So just to put that caveat out there again as well.
Yeah, I think the actual number, it's just operating is 1,177,172. And of course, we know we have that extra debt thing moving in there of this, where it's
Mhm.
increasing 73,000 because of what had been missed in previous years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you
So we're looking at 1,250,000 of operating and debt,
Mhm.
not including the capital.
Yeah.
Based on the present numbers, right?
Correct.
So then if you go back to the top and looking at, I mean, without even looking at the rest of the town pieces and
Mhm.
seeing that the starting of the new revenue is, what was it, 588,000. You can see where
Yeah,
obviously
no
the
doubt.
big
Yeah.
differential is.
Agreed.
And a little bit of the challenge here is, and I did speak with our financial advisors at Unibank briefly today. Obviously, our excess levy as of now, as of the end of FY 25 is that 1.2 million that you see right here. But once that is gone, that's when you go to override, and or debt exclusion. And one of the questions I had is recognizing that we vote one number, one bottom line number, but that does include capital items. We may actually have to do an override and a debt exclusion because some of those capital items will fall as a debt exclusion given the definition that they meet. So either way, both an override and a debt exclusion would require town meeting vote as well as a ballot vote at the town election that happens a couple weeks, a month after town meeting.
Mondays after.
2 Mondays after. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I know I should know this, but when did you do your town meeting?
The 5th of May.
Thank you.
May 5th, thanks.
So
Yeah, it's always the first Monday of May.
Okay, thanks.
Boylston's always the same.
Of course.
So you have
I think there's a half.
I'm used to that from hitting them over him. We took one, I took it.
Which town you like the best?
We went back and forth each year, took a turn each year. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Well, one starts a half an hour earlier, right? Doesn't Boylston start earlier?
Possibly,
I
yeah.
think they start at 7 and we start at 7:30. So you can figure out how fast you can drive.
Okay. there you go.
Okay, topic to the small, can you make that ribbon disappear so our real estate is bigger on the screen? You know, that little up arrow, make the ribbon disappear. Yeah, then,
This thing?
yeah, that thing, yeah. Because Scott just said something that I wanna hear again. So you were saying, Scott, that we have a certain amount of additional
Oh, yes.
projected revenue was it fine?
Right,
Right there.
using, right.
Down, where is it?
Yeah.
The 5A, 508.
508.
Right, essentially new funds were using
This
the,
is good.
the typical new growth, nothing really much changed. I mean, state
We're
aid,
gonna match it up. Yeah.
tiny down amount. But we did 2.5% on the
Mhm.
property tax levy.
Right, because that's
So-
what people anticipate.
So you can pretty much see that the
Mhm.
2.5% of property tax levy extracted 200,000, it's about 288,000, probably 290,000, because we had the state aid go down by 2,000. Assuming, like Kristen said, local receipts right now it's just level.
Mm.
Maybe you go up 50,000, I mean, we'll try and figure it out, but that's not like it's gonna go up to, not like we're gonna get 800,000 out of that. So, yeah, that's with the 2.5%. So you can figure that 2.5% is 290,000.
Mhm.
So if you go up 5% on the levy, which is about where we went up last year, you can add another 290,000. And of course, that another 290,000 every 2.5 percentage points. So you can pretty much get an idea of
Yeah.
relative to previous years, what the tax impact will be on the levy.
Mhm. Yeah.
And one thing I'll show, which is
And
interesting,
Kristen, you'll share that with us, right, electronically? Thank
absolutely.
you.
One thing which is interesting, is this not showing it on here for me? No, where's my little percentage? I think it might be on here. Nope. So what we ended up having to go up on property taxes, and I don't know why it's not, it must be showing up. I know if I open this, it's gonna open the whole thing on me, isn't it? No, it's not. So we ended up going up more than we actually anticipated when everything shook out, because our new growth, we estimated at $300,000 last year when we did our
Mhm.
budget, and it came in at more closer to 250. So unfortunately, you have to make that up once you've passed a budget.
Yes.
So where we ended up was closer to between 6.5% and 7% that we went up
Mm.
on taxes.
Mhm.
And that's how it ate into the levy.
Mm.
So,
6.5, 7, no, that seems a little high. It was ended up being around 5%. When we thought it was gonna be a little around less than 4.5% from the new growth.
let me check
being
that
aware
out.
of- And also obviously just the adjustments like you talked about from the Solomon Pond Mall. Valued lower
Hmm.
again.
All right,
Hmm.
I'll check that out. There could be a typo in there. I apologize if there is. I'll check that out.
New growth, huh?
New growth is rough, and
It's rough, huh?
one of the
Yes.
things we've talked about is, the town, has to make some decisions. I know we're looking at our zoning, the planning board is. But also, there's places that growth is appropriate and places that it's not, like in any other community. And it's important to preserve what makes Berlin Berlin. It's a
Sure.
beautiful community, but we also have to look at where we want to be for the future.
Yep.
Because, the residential burden that gets borne for taxes is also even more acute here because our population is 34% seniors. And so
Right.
it's different even than Boylston, right? So you have 34% of seniors, many on a fixed income, many whom own older farmhouses that they may have bought back in the 50s or 60s.
Yep.
That now have just escalated
Yeah.
in market value, so therefore their taxes have grown. So it's kind of like a land rich, cash poor kind of situation, right? And we don't want to see people having to leave town because their taxes are
Mhm.
continually escalating by large amounts every year. So we try to be very sensitive to that, while at the same time, as I always say, I am a proud public school graduate of the Leicester Public Schools. And I wouldn't be here without a solid education. And it's extremely important to give our students what they need
Yeah.
to succeed.
Yeah.
We have to strike that balance. And the challenge is, like you said, we don't want to have, a battle on the town and school side. But what happens is, as we go up
Yeah.
in one area, we have to look at going down in another. So we're balancing things like our biggest budget drivers are public safety, right? As they are in any town. So if we're to make budget cuts, we're talking public safety, which increases response times for police, fire, EMS. And so it's trying to figure out, and yet children are extremely important as well. So it's a tough balance to strike.
And the difference from, and I'm much older, right? But the difference in growing up is you went to your public school, you went to your neighborhood school, you didn't leave your community. We're in a competitive business now, right? We're like Walmart and Target, right? People have options. They can go to the charter schools, they can go to private schools. We lose kids to St. John's and Notre Dame, and we don't want that to happen. So we're trying to make sure that we're providing the highest quality education. And we spent, most of the morning today looking at the scheduling of the middle school at Tohoto, right? So make it more enticing for our students to want to stay in our community and not move elsewhere or go elsewhere. So that's why we're here at the table, making sure that we can give what we need for our teachers so they can deliver what they kids for the kids. So parents are keeping their kids here as well too. It's important. And that's why even when you have an opportunity, just look at Tohonto's new website, like what a difference, right? It's enticing. It's hooked up to our Facebook, our social media. So when parents are now looking at our community, they're going to see newer things that are happening, current things. Education is now a competitive business.
We have the budget.
Any other questions? for us?
Yeah, anybody have anything? Anybody comment?
Yeah. I do, and I want to keep, we're getting late here. So on that last point, I'm looking at the cherry sheet for Berlin Boylston.
Yep.
Right, and so just so I understand, the state lists estimated charges, so there's school choice sending tuition.
Mhm.
And there's charter schools sending tuition.
Yep.
So our district pays for sending tuition for charter schools,
Correct,
right? And then we also pay for school choice.
correct.
So those two things come in as offsets to what the state is giving us in
Mhm.
revenue.
Right.
But then we also get receipts from the state for our school choice receiving tuition, right?
Yes.
I get a little confused when I'm looking at this, so I want
Yeah.
to kind of lay that out. So but we're in an unfortunate position where
Mhm.
the school committee has voted, no, don't give us school choice students, huh?
No,
We're in that position?
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
That's not
That-
correct.
that-
So,
get me
again,
straight.
I want to
Get
be
me
really,
straight there.
I want us to be really careful about comments we say publicly and make sure they're accurate.
Okay,
Right, so it's the next thing on the agenda for school committee in March, and right now our principals are looking at any open rooms that they have, only spaces they have in their schools.
Yeah.
And so I'll be giving that report to school committee in March, and then the decision we made after that.
but I'm right about the flow of money, right?
Mhm.
So,
That wasn't the question you asked me, though, right? Because
Well,
the school committee said
Correct.
no, the school-
You are
Sorry.
correct about the
Correct,
flow of
that's
money.
flow of money, yes.
So we use
The other-
the choice dollars we get in, is money that we retain, but we use that money frequently and we're using it in the budget to offset the budget. So that offsets the budget somewhat, and we do it proportional to the students, try to do it proportional to the students we take into the various schools. The school choice out is an actual expense line within the budget. So those do offset them, but each other, but just in slightly different ways. It's the same thing, but they do offset each other.
So money can move in two directions, but if
Correct.
we open up school choice seats, we have more money coming in.
Yes,
Right,
it's just
okay.
important
Just
to look at student counts. So it's a lot like Priceline.com, right? You get that last minute seat, they're willing to sell it for a certain price.
Yeah.
If the seat's open. So we're right now asking the principals, do you have seats open?
Okay,
But we need to be careful, right? So school choice is a lottery, right? And people can apply, right? And we need to make sure that we do it that way. But we're looking at educating our own children, right? And I know there's money that comes in from having students from school choice, but then we're also educating other students as well too that come into our district and that become ours as well too. But there's pros and cons, and there are many school communities that say, yes, we want to participate in school choice. There are other communities that don't. So it's definitely a conversation, but you got to make sure you have the space. And once those students become part of our district, there are students for the rest of their career in school, right? So you can't say, well, you're not getting that A, or you need some extra support and help. So you got to go back to this community. Yet once you're ours, you're ours. So you need to be mindful about whether you decide you want school choice or not. So I'm glad school committee is taking the time to think about it and looking at the spaces that are available in the community.
well, it's curious to me that if we have students voluntarily walking out and going to other places, wouldn't we be wise to offset that expense and bring students into those seats? I mean,
Again,
it's just
a
a
lottery, right?
a financial question.
It is financially, yes, but it's a lottery too.
I think you'll see the money in is greater than the money out,
That's right.
right? So we are bringing in more students than are leaving.
That was my next question,
Which
so
is a
thank you.
definitive answer.
Yeah.
And as we look at principals are looking at seats, I think it's really important. We don't look just at seats. We look at class makeup.
Sure,
We look at situations. So 22 kids in one class can be a small class in some situations. 22 kids in a class can be a very large class, depending on the makeups of the students, the situations and things like that. So our principals are very mindful of that. It's not just a seat filling escapade. It's a really thinking about what our capacity is.
I respect that. Yeah,
Okay.
I understand that.
Okay.
So I have just a few questions, and I think it's a simple one. I'm looking at foundation enrollment for the chapter 70
Mhm.
monies for fiscal 26. So just to clarify, so we have Berlin has 422 students in the district. Boylston has 634. Do those numbers sound right? Or what
Say
are
give
the?
or take, I'd have to
Yeah.
look at, I have an assessment spreadsheet that I go to. It's a very tedious process of calculating that. Because foundation enrollment, the state typically puts out numbers
Yeah.
that it's hard to say. So looking at those strict numbers, it's hard to say exactly what makes up those students.
So again, you just said.
So there's some behind the scenes calculation that goes on relative to those flat numbers and who ends up where.
And that reflects the enrollment of, like, October of 24 would be reflected
Yes,
the
those
actual
would be,
numbers
those
in
would
what
be
we see in
October
fiscal
numbers.
26.
And then
Yeah.
there's initial October numbers, and I think the final numbers are a refinement that happens in December, January of those October numbers. So they're not released in October. They usually. come out.
Understood.
So you're reading those numbers, our total enrollment in the entire district is 1,056. Right, so that's the combination of the
So-
students that are flowing into Tohoto, right, as well too, that come from Berlin and Walston.
Okay,
Correct.
and then with respect to Tohoto students, how do you count the students that go to Assabet, the Berlin students that go to Assabet? Because we have 44 this year.
Sorry.
Where do they fit into this count? This.
I'm trying to think of, I need to look at the actual calculation sheet.
Mhm.
I don't have it in front of me. But we count the charter students, we count the choice students. I'm thinking that the Assabet students may not actually count for foundation enrollment.
Okay,
Once they attend a different school district, Assabet's technically a separate school district. They don't graduate from our school, they go.
So we're not sending there, it's just they're
Yeah.
not part of our population.
Yeah.
Right, so they're not in this chapter, they should.
Yeah, I think so. I need to look at it, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
so the reason I asked that
There's
is when
no- Yeah.
I spent a little time,
Mhm.
I did my homework today.
Yeah.
Good,
Because I went to a good public
good,
school.
absolutely.
So when I look at the regional agreement and how I
Mhm.
calculate
Yep.
the operating budget,
Yep.
the the minimum local contributions, of course, figure in, but the number
Yes.
of students figures in,
Uh-huh.
which gets back a bit to the per pupil cost,
Yep.
not for the reasons we were just talking
Correct.
earlier. So when you do those calculations, there should be a difference between Berlin Memorial and Boylston Elementary. In the numbers, in the
Yeah.
total
Oh, yeah.
operating
Yeah.
budget. Okay,
Yeah.
so then when I go back and look at,
Mhm.
well, I look at the slides,
Yeah.
the soft copy that we got that had both
Mhm.
Boylston and
Yeah.
Berlin numbers in it. So I don't understand, and I don't want to keep you here to
Yeah.
answer that question, but at some point,
Sure.
a couple of calculations I'm not getting, which is, sorry, guys, the administrative load is equal between the two elementary schools, the amount.
So it has always been done, and this is as 25, 25, 50. I don't know the progenitor of that. I've reached out to.
25, 25, 50, so Tohoto
Yes.
50.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So I don't-
Toronto picks up
I-
50.
it's consistent with the agreement, but
I can't, yeah, I can't speak to that. I mean, so everything I have shows that for the past umpteen years,
it's just what we
it's
do.
been 25,
Yeah.
25, 50. I've reached out to the former, the person formerly in my position, Rob Conry, who I'm sure
Yes.
you guys have
Yeah,
dealt
yeah.
with.
Yeah.
He was pretty clear that that's
Yeah.
just the way it had always been from the time when they were. So I would agree that I think that's a little bit
Little
of
bit.
confusion relative to the regional agreement. I think there's a lot of conversations that can be had about that calculation. And either, not changing even the feel of it, but how we can make it more manageable and more transparent. Because, as it stands, it uses values from a bunch of different sources that all kind of tie in. And there's a lot of calculation using sort of those enrollment numbers that are sitting on DESE's website would probably be very similar in nature and serve the same purpose, right? Without all of the
Mm.
trying to figure out. And as I go through it, there's always, one or two students you can't really place because you're trying to place where there are in charter enrollments and in choice enrollments. And students are a shifty bunch. They move around a lot, right? So between the charter numbers and the choice numbers, a student may have been at a charter school, now they're at choice school, now they're back in, and the timing on those reports can be different. So there's some nuances, and if we were to, again, I'm not here to suggest you drastically change that formula, but I think there are some nuances that might be healthy for the community and provide some of that transparency that you're looking for.
Yeah.
I can provide the basis for my numbers, and where those percentages come for. It's also a 5-year moving average, so it's not as strictly this year. It's based on all the past years.
But the 25, 25, 50 explains the numbers
Yeah,
that are in
yeah.
version 2, so I've got that.
But the thing we should be looking at, sorry to interrupt you, is it's about time that we should be getting together and revisiting our regional agreement, right? So it shouldn't be
Mhm.
just a document that stands alone, right?
Okay.
And so one of the things that we did in front of school committee last night was present to have a strategic plan done, right? We don't have one for our school district that's current. And one of the things that will be happening is they'll be reaching out to people in the community, both communities, and getting feedback. And one of the things that we should be looking at, this is the time after X number of years with our regional agreement to say, let's revisit this. Let's take a look at all aspects of it, right? It shouldn't be just a document that stands alone forever the way it is. So just know that part of the planning for next year, we'll be looking at the regional agreement.
So let me say one thing in defense of that regional agreement, since I'm sitting next to this man.
No.
Among other things, is that I think it was necessary for the town buy-in, who were used to having
Sure.
independence around
Yeah.
these elementary schools. And
Sure.
so I think it's a process we needed to walk through.
Absolutely. It just should never just be always just sitting on a bookshelf and not getting back and stuff.
No. So
Yeah.
there's another breakdown that I think doesn't involve the regional agreement that I also was curious about, Aaron, which is the allocation on the chapter 70
Mhm.
credits
Yep.
against the
Yep.
assessments.
Mhm.
I don't know if there was a particular purpose or logic, but the Boylston got a much larger credit than Berlin.
It is
and,
based
Tohoto
on.
was-
Yep.
was
Yep, it's
higher.
based on the total enrollments. So I have a whole calculation spreadsheet of students at Tohoto, students at Boylston, Berlin, And that share gets split up so Tohoto gets split up just by the students at Tohoto.
Right.
The chapter 70 gets split up by students district-wide according to their towns and applied in accordance. So I
So it's number of
calculate
students.
separately.
Is it number?
It's all based on numbers of students, yeah. Yeah, and that's, I believe that is explicit in the regional agreement that chapter 70 and chapter 71 are
Yes.
broken out by those student
It's
counts.
in
So
the-
that's exactly what I've done.
But so
Um,
is the entire operating budget. It's not identical, the formula. It's a little hard to understand, but
Right,
it is a very
right,
similar formula.
Right.
The percent
Right.
of population in the
Mhm.
schools that come from
Yeah,
respective
and,
towns.
and again, this is, I think where maybe, just revisiting some of the nuances rather than,
Yeah.
I'm not arguing against to throw it away and go to the statutory method, but I think there's maybe some small tweaks that can be made that would be more transparent. So the viewer could look at the DESI website and say, this is exactly where Aaron's numbers are coming from, rather than 5 different charter lists and choice lists and things like that. So I think that might be, a more intimately transparent approach to it.
And after a successful budget season this year, which we know we're gonna have, that will be the time to be looking at our regional school agreement, right?
Mhm.
And having these
Yeah.
conversations where people are feeling good, they're getting all the answers to the questions you guys want as well too. So I know you did your homework, you asked some great questions, but you really knew the answers the whole time. I think you were checking to make sure that we did our homework as well too. I appreciate that as an educator. It's okay. It's good. It's good.
No, I really was curious about it.
So you want to make sure we knew the answer.
No, I think the public needs to know something. And I read this stuff and I make it up. You guys are the experts, right? So you tell me, did I get it right or I didn't
Yeah.
get it right?
I hang out with the experts. So what other questions you have for us? 'Cause I have to make a 2-hour delay notice again as well too.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
have
yes.
a comment
Sure.
to make
Sure.
that I think kind of needs to be heard from
Mhm.
from kind of a community perspective.
Hmm.
While I do agree with that we have to find a balance, I'm kind of not liking this big competitiveness thing that I'm hearing
Mhm.
as far as having to compete with private schools and so forth. Families are going to make the decision to send their children to private schools, to charter schools, to wherever,
Mhm.
Sure.
based on their present,
Sure.
on their preference. And I think by focusing on kind of this competitiveness, we're gonna have no choice. If all these things are gonna continue to be implemented to compete with a private school,
Mhm.
our taxes are gonna have to keep going up and up
Mhm.
and up. And we need to have a budget that is fair and equitable for everyone in the community,
Sure.
not just the students, not just the families that have school-age children.
Agree.
And what's being created is a system, a town, a community that is becoming only available to the elite people who can afford to remain living here. The current budget that we're looking at here, the current budget for the past couple of
Mhm.
years is it's what's happening.
Sure.
There's no way to avoid saying that's what's happening.
Fair enough.
And it's pushing people out of town
Mhm.
regardless, and I'm sorry, but the school budget is
Sure.
the big driving force in the budget.
Yeah.
And I think instead of focusing on, I've raised three kids in this community. They've gone through the public school system. I never once thought about going out.
That's right.
It's like you live in the community, you send your kids to the school in the community.
Yeah.
But when it starts pushing families who live in the community out because they can no longer afford to stay here because of taxes,
Mhm.
and we look at it as the school budget is what's pushing us out of town,
Sure.
it creates a lot of tension with this you against us kind of
So
thing.
that's not what our mission is. We're not creating a you against us. And we also know that the highest budget driver for both communities is the education, right?
Uh-huh.
And I get when people come to this table, whether it be the fire, the police, they're all fighting for their budgets as well too. And that's why we're sitting here today fighting for what we think is best for the education for our kids. But we'd be naive to think it's not a competitive educational system that we're in right now. And whether we like it or not, parents are doing it. When I was growing up, we played Little League right around the corner. Parents now driving their kids all over the place, for different sports and they're driving their place at their kids for education. So we're just trying to make sure that we're providing the highest quality education, because then we want these kids to whether go off to Assabet or go off to a profession or go off to Ivy League schools. We want them to be successful because we in turn want to come back to our community, right? And prosper as well too. So that's what we're trying to make sure that we keep our students here. We got to remain competitive. Is education's changing so much. The technology is changing so much. All of those pieces, the Chromebooks, everything that we need to make sure we're providing so our kids can stay current. So when they go off to their professions or colleges and universities, they're also successful and competitive as well too. It's just the way it is right now.
Okay.
And I think my only caveat, I mean, I think you've seen some of our increases. Those are real increases.
That's right.
I mean, those aren't.
Don't actually ride anything. We're not building new
Those
plans.
alone are budget breakers for
Sure.
the environment. And so I guess I would say, I mean, I hope we have, if it ends up that we have to make cuts, I would hope that we have the support of the people at this table, and cuts have to be made in that. At places like town meeting and things like that, if people stand up, I hope we have that support, because that's what the reality is. It just is.
Now,
I
can-
can't change health insurance.
Can you
costs.
offer to myself or to other people in the community? Because a lot of this too, I look at as, yes, they are necessities, but a lot of it is mandated from either state or federal. Who can we go to at that upper level to say, hey, you want to mandate all this stuff? Start
It's a
opening up
great-
your wallet.
It's a great question, right? So we were just this week with Senator Kennedy and Representative Kilcoyne, right? They came to Kilcoyne, what, am I correctly, Peg?
Yes.
They were here to recognize the football team, right, to Hondo. Those are the conversations you should be having with them. Like, how are they helping us out at the state level so that these,
I'm
exactly.
having the conversations with
So-
them, okay?
so-
I was having them last year, 2 years ago about special education.
So-
I've been having.
So I have to be honest with you, when you're looking at this budget, there are some things that as the instructional leader that I would love to be putting on there as well too, but we're not, right? Because we're trying to be mindful of the things that should be taking place. There are things, cameras, stuff that we really want to make sure we're putting to keep our district safe as well too. We're being mindful of what we're putting on there, but it's the mandated stuff, the insurance, it's killing us, all of this stuff, right? It really is. And negotiations. Right? It's another huge factor that we have to, we're all aware what's happening with the MTA across this entire state right now, right? We're trying to be careful of that as well too. That's a huge piece. So yes, you should be talking to Senator Kennedy and Representative Kilcoyne about that. They should be helping us and fighting at the state level for the governor's budget. We're still, I mean, transportation reimbursement's good, but it should be 100%. That's what you guys agreed upon, right? Like, why isn't that happening? That should be a non-argument there.
Yeah, it would be nice, like I see even the latest one that they had was they're just putting together a new study to give us new information in the year 2027. It's always pushing everything down the road to study what we already know the answers are to, but we just push it down the road. So I agree with you completely, but unfortunately, we know we're not going to get any short-term answers out of these guys.
It's probably more mandates us. Just the
Yes.
AG's office this week came out with this new cell phone policy they want us to enforce. Like who's doing that work, right? Making sure that it's just a lot that is coming our way that we have no control.
The administrative load has grown a lot. I sympathize, I appreciate the difficulty of that. I mean, this is a public session, so people who are listening to us, you know who to call, you know where,
Absolutely.
and I'd love to see the funding equation flip from the kind of percentages that we have at the municipal level. Those percentages really belong to the state because the costs are driven
Yes.
there, and so there's no reason why we should have these difficult conversations in our local towns.
And-
Because,
Especially with the income tax that we all pay to
Yeah,
the state
well-
and everything else.
And I'm sorry that I don't want you to, I'm just passionate. We're passionate about, this is
Mhm.
what our
Yeah.
jobs are. That's what they've hired us to do, to fight for our kids and for our teachers in this district. That's why I'm here, right? Everything else is just as important, but that's why we're sitting at this table at this time to get what we can for our students to make sure they have the best.
Okay, I think,
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay. No, that's okay.
Great question.
Let people get their points. Do you have anything, Cliff?
Oh, no, I have nothing to say.
You're quiet.
I know.
Not a good thing or bad.
I just want to thank you both for your presentation.
Patience.
And your willingness to answer questions and your openness. And I respect your advocacy.
Yes. And I also respect the fact that you are actually here. Last year, we were off this week because the schools did not show. So there is so.
I know everyone said, but trying to make that connected.
I'll make sure I put it.
What time I'm gonna be late to meetings.
Yeah.
For me right now. It's a bad reputation I'm getting. Sorry about that.
I think we're always gonna show, we're not looking for a fight.
100%.
I.
We've always never had a problem in the past, so that was, and I think we've nipped that in the bud and we're moving on.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Very much.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, any transfers? I didn't see anything. Did I miss anything?
Transfers.
No.
Yeah, good luck with the snow. or whatever. Yeah, Yes. the delayed opening, whatever.
All right, what is?
The select board would like to invite the FinCom to their March 3rd meeting to,
But they're gonna invite us to a party.
it is a party. I mean, if you bring the food, can I go bring the candy? You know, I'll bring the party. You know, we'll have a good time. March 3rd, 7 o'clock.
Just to let you know, I mean, I know we're down one number. I will definitely not be available because I will be flying during the time. So, because that's the Monday, right? March
It is a
30th,
Monday.
Yes. So,
We may not have a meeting.
They-
Good night.
So we're March 11th. We're good on that date, correct?
Yes.
For our school committee meeting?
Yes.
That's a Tuesday, yeah?
Oh, yes, first Tuesday of the month for school.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the second, yeah.
now,
Good night.
we can go forward, just,
We may not have a meeting because Scott will not be here, our Scott.
So do we want to do March 10th then? We had talked about March 3rd at the meeting Monday night.
Come on the 24th?
I thought it was, okay.
One moment.
Could you can Peg come up to the table so we can hear her? I mean, you might be able to hear her from the audience, but.
Peg missed that discussion somewhere.
I might have missed the discussion Monday night. I thought we were talking about having them come on the 3rd after both of the schools had presented, but is it the 24th we want them to come?
It is the 24th. If you look at our draft agendas, it's 24th.
Ah.
It says FinCom that we're trying to keep the agenda clear of all other items. The 3rd, Scott Hawkins is away,
Got it.
so I don't think the 10th would give us much time if they're going back on the 11th to present it.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
February 24th, that makes a lot more sense because that's when
February
we're gonna have a meeting pretty much centered around
Yes.
the budget. For some reason, I thought you wanted to have that first at the select board and then we meet and so
No,
I
joint
apologize.
session. Now, on the 24th, it would be at 7 o'clock because we have executive session from 6 to 7, so. Like
February
7:10.
24th, 7 PM.
Yep.
Joint with the select board.
So if you
Okay.
could post that on your agenda, that would be awesome.
Who's doing her?
I can post it.
I only write the minutes on paper. I don't do anything else.
No problem.
I will do it. I have the permission to do it, so.
Thank you, Scott.
Next week or week and a half.
And that's here, yeah? That's
That will be.
That'll be right in this room.
Yeah, I will just basically do a cut and paste of their stuff for the, of the Zoom or whatever they use.
Perfect. I may have missed the
Yeah.
date, but I know they meet in this room. So I got that put down pat.
Okay,
It's been a long week. Okay, and then I did already mention this, but we did get the actual assessment letter from Assabet this afternoon. So that is our
I think you sent it to us,
number.
didn't you?
I did send it to you. Just gonna read it, but
I mean, that's still their first shot, because they will do a final vote themselves later, but they obviously try to get it out early for the 7 communities to hopefully come to agreement. At least 5 of them.
yes, so they voted, the district committee voted on February 11th. To actually approve their budget in the amount of 30,614,095. So they are saying that our apportioned share is 858,893. And this is actually our assessment letter from the treasurer of Assabet. So I don't believe this number will change, but we can confirm that next week when Assabet is here. That is a almost $100,000 increase over what they were estimating when they were here in December. Now, we all know those are just estimated numbers, and we've picked up an additional 7 students. Plus, there's a reduction of out-of-district cost as well. And if you recall from when they were here, they said there's one more year of this big shift from moving away from out-of-district to in-district students, which is why there's this big increase, because we're now taking more kids from Berlin, more kids from the other in-district schools, and basically eliminating out-of-district students because the demand is so high on the in-district side.
What was the total increase number?
Let me.
Over last year,
I was just
bring up
pull the
last
spreadsheet
year's
up.
number. Assabet. Regional assessment, this isn't going debt or
It was
capital.
6 something.
Was 621, 688, and right now the new number that includes the debt. I think 792.
I made them
without the,
both. I made them equal. So last year, the total was 695,051 with everything, including the debt and the capital stabilization. And then this year with everything, it's the 858. So it is $163,842 increase, which represents a 23.6% increase
For Aspet.
for Assabet. So that is significant.
It is
And I
significant.
did talk to the superintendent today. He was kind enough to not only respond to my late afternoon email, but also give me a call. Because he knew that we had the FinCom meeting tonight, and he wanted to explain that in addition to our student enrollment increasing by the 7 students, the state also increased our share of the minimum local contribution by $141,886 over FY 25. So it sounds like once again, we can thank the
State
state
of Massachusetts.
and
That's where the minimum local contribution kills us, is on Assabet.
Aspet, yeah, I understand. that.
And I'm gonna show you actually, because what he sent over was very helpful, because it actually shows Berlin Boylston as well. And there, the minimum local contribution increased even more than that, from the state for Berlin Boylston. So let me just
Something to
share
watch
this.
there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at once here. Hold on a second.
I saw that when you sent it.
Oh, good. I wanted to let the folks online be able to see it as well. There we go. Okay, so,
So it actually didn't change by because what they presented before had an increase of 7, so the number of students changed. That didn't have to change anything.
so it's gotta be just that,
No, because I thought we said.
Oh, this, when the
Oh.
state came up with its new
the
numbers.
state numbers.
That's what did it.
Yeah. so
Our share
make
might
that a
have
little
adjusted
smaller.
a little bit depending on what the other town numbers were.
Right, so if you look at this and you look at the bottom line 10, where it says change FY 26 to FY 25. You'll see that for Assabet, our change has gone up from 141,886, as the superintendent indicated. It's also gone up for Berlin Boylston, 181,225. So the combined total for all districts for just Berlin's increase is $323,115. And this is the Chapter 70 apportionment of local contribution.
And this number is mandated by the state.
That is
Yes.
correct.
They dictate what the number is.
Yep.
So
Yes.
is there a sequence, Kristen, June, where you have the equalization value determination for the municipality and then these minimum local contributions flow from that?
Oh, my gosh.
I would
Language
let
used
need a
to be-
computer to sort
explain
that
that
out.
one. I'm like, Cliff, explain that one?
Well, Jesse has a big formula in it.
Yes.
Well, then,
But doesn't that feed it? Doesn't the local property values, don't our combined value? of
the
property
thumbnail
doesn't-
version is that each town is given a wealth value.
Yes.
And it's calculated using many factors. And based on the wealth value, that is how the minimum local contribution is developed.
Yeah, includes income,
Income
includes
and-
property,
and
yes.
values.
So considering the size of our town, you could have some couple of very wealthy people in
Mhm.
town that
Would tip it.
yes,
Once you average everything.
yeah.
Yeah, the smaller the pool, the greater the variance depending on.
Statistics and drop the outliers. What's wrong with the state? We need to drop those outliers.
They failed that class.
They did.
Well, that's the
Rationalize the
problem with
data.
any small town is the, whenever we talk about averages,
Yeah.
that's where the, statistics don't lie, but the
That's
averages
just about median though, isn't it?
becomes a problem. What was that?
Never mind.
It's 9:20, I'd like to point out.
No more minute.
Okay, are we ready? Anything?
One last item. It was suggested to me that perhaps we may want to start those Berlin-Boylston joint meetings back up again that we had last year. And that was between the FinCom chairs, the select board chairs, and the town administrators. And so I just wanted to throw that out to see what the interest is.
I would definitely be interested, just especially the fact too, that we'd like to know where Boylston sits with their numbers. I mean, we know their excess capacity is very low. And especially with this, the miss piece of the bond that was not there, which is hitting us at 95,000. You can see the number ended up being on their side. It was like 180,000, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's the typical 1/3, 2/3 number. And just to see, I mean, are they looking at anything going towards an override? Because they don't need nearly as much of an increase in their budget to be hitting a need for an override.
Right, exactly.
So it'd be good to know where both sides sit.
I think that's a great idea.
All right. I think that is something we can get started. I will speak to the select board chair and we'll get that. Well, I'm sure she would be in agreement. We're talking about restarting the Berlin-Boylston joint budget conversations that we had last year with the FinCom chairs, the select board chairs, and the TAs of both communities. So I will send an email then and reach out and get those conversations started so we can see where folks stand over on the Boylston side of the shop.
Yeah, it'd be really good to do that. I unfortunately, in looking at my phone, realized I have a conflict on the 24th. I can't make that meeting. But go ahead without me.
Okay, but we can, at least 3 of us are making it.
You have a quorum. Yeah, go ahead.
And do we have any word on appointment?
Depends.
Nothing I have recently heard. There has been some potential interest expressed.
But no more.
I think there needs to be some follow-up perhaps from the FinCom chair.
Okay,
I just want to sell this person out on TV in case they really don't want to join the FinCom, but I was approached or.
no, they contacted.
Okay.
So yes,
Yeah, there's an individual who may be interested in filling out the vacancy for the rest of this budget cycle. So
okay.
As a technical matter, has Julie actually resigned?
I don't.
She was going to, I do not know that it has actually happened. I'll reach out to Barry. I will,
We need a note from.
I can ask.
Yeah, Julie, it needs
Eloise.
to go to Eloise.
Yeah, let me ask
Oh,
Eloise if
Eloise.
Julie has
Okay.
formally resigned.
Because
And I'll let you know.
at the last minutes, I put her as absent, but
yeah, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So that detail will just work out.
I think that's all I had.
All right, thank you. All right, motion to adjourn.
Second,
All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Scott. Everybody.
I will not be here next week,
Okay.
which is okay because I kind of have to abstain from any conversation.